Well, for more, let's cross to Berlin. Joachim Bitterlich is former German ambassador to NATO. Thank you for speaking with us here on France 24.
A pleasure to be with you again.
It's a tightrope act, isn't it, for Jens Stoltenberg when he speaks in Washington?
Well, it's normal, I think. It's an honor at the same time to talk to the Congress and to put the situation as it is, with a slight difference to Donald Trump. You could see NATO is a real success story over 70 years. It's the eldest alliance of the free world, and survived more complaints and crises than any other. And today we have new challenges. If you want, we have what I call worrying nations within NATO and some worried nations. The worrying nations are the US with Donald Trump's policy, and at the same time Germany and Turkey. And the worried nations are the Eastern Europeans, who are afraid of the neighbor in the east, of Russia. And I think NATO has been remarkably resilient in the last 20, 30 years even. NATO has gone through a stabilization, a deterrence, then stabilization, then conflict management, and there are enough challenges ahead of NATO.
Let's go through that list of worrying nations. First of all, the United States. Is today at 70 Donald Trump or Vladimir Putin more of a threat for NATO?
Neither one nor the other at the end of the day. I think Donald Trump has a certain right moment to tell to others they should do more for defense. At the same time, when you look at the figures that are circulating, 70%, 30%, 70% US, 30% Europe, is a certain myth, which is unhelpful at the end of the day. On the other hand, I think the Germans have to come out of their, let's call it a certain deadlock within the intra-German debate about what I call the role of a military. And the Germans have to become aware much more of their responsibility, together with the French and the British and some others, for the security of their nations. And security does not end at the borders, but security is more than ever conflict management. And I think when you look at the East, on the one hand, NATO has not any intention to attack the Russians. I think it's clear to the Russians too. And I think the Russians won't neither attack NATO. But you have to see that these Russians have not done enough in the last 20 years to reduce the anxiety of their former allies, the Baltic countries, Poland and others. And the Russians should have done much more.
Yeah, so let me ask you on that point, Joachim Bitterlich, because the Donald Trump on Tuesday once again singling out Germany for not paying its fair share. When Germany looks east, is there change in Berlin in the way the government looks at defense spending?
Yes, there is a change. And the Germans try to, let's call it, to make an effort. But there is this, let's call it, this unfortunate figure in the world, the 2% GNP. And where the Germans would like now to reach 1.5. But on the other hand, I think I blame to some extent German politicians who have been accepting this figure in NATO 3 times even, instead of insisting to look at defense expenditure, let's say, in a more wide spirit, including, for example, development policy and other security policy items, migration, etc. But I think the Germans would like to do an effort, but the Germans seem to be in a certain deadlock with, even within the government, between the Christian Democrats and the Social Democrats. The Social Democrats, I think, are far away, let's say, from an agreement towards raising defense expenditure. And I think what the Germans need at the end of the day is a real debate about what I call the role of a military and of their responsibility in this field. The Germans have been thinking for too long time what I call on the basis on the peace dividend after the end of the Cold War in 1990. And the Germans had to take into consideration that the world has not become more peaceful around them than before, to some extent. Look at the world as it is.
And not as it was in the past.
Therefore, the Germans have to do an effort.
Let's talk about Turkey for 1 second. This Wednesday, Turkey's foreign minister proposing a joint working group to determine that the purchase of those Russian S-400 missile defense systems don't pose a threat to the United States or to NATO. Do they, Joachim Bitterlich? Is this grounds for kicking Turkey out of NATO?
No, I don't think so. We have a strategic interest in maintaining Turkey within NATO, as we have a strategic interest to bind Turkey as sound as possible to the European Union.
And the purchase of Russian missile defense systems, is that worth sanctioning Turkey over?
In my personal eyes, not.
So it's not a threat to the United States or NATO?
In my eyes, no. In my eyes, no. On the other hand, well, it's Turkey has always been trying to play a certain positive role even towards Russia. Look at nuclear power plants, nuclear energy. Turkey is buying nuclear power plants in France and in Russia. And therefore they try to establish a certain balance with its neighbor in the north. At the same time, you know exactly that Turkey is trying to play a certain role in the Middle East and in the states of the former Soviet Union. We know this. And in the Middle East, you have this unhelpful competition actually, between Iran, Turkey, you may add Saudi Arabia and Egypt, and with an arbiter which is Israel, for the whole Middle East, and which has not been helpful. There the Russians are in a defensive positions, the Americans are far away, if you want. Guarantee power, yes, to Israel, as the Russians are, but my conviction is both Russians and Americans could have avoided the Syrian conflict at the end. They have not done so. And therefore there is really enough to do for both sides. And I think you have to recognize when you talk about Turkey, Turkey is considering itself as one of these key powers in the whole Middle East. And perhaps we have not taken this totally into consideration in the past. We have to bind Turkey in much more. And therefore, I'm not supportive on all the aspects of the German migration policy. But I think Angela Merkel was right to see the Turkish side and to conclude an agreement for the EU. It was important for the whole EU.
All right, Joachim Bitterlich, many thanks. Joachim Bitterlich, former German ambassador to NATO, speaking as the Secretary General of the Alliance, addresses a joint session of the U.S. Congress on the 70th anniversary of NATO.